Have you ever felt irresistibly drawn to a gaze, to a gesture so pure that you knew deep in your soul that your life was about to change? Stay with me, because the story I'm about to tell you about a baby gorilla and his caretaker is much more than a cute tale. It's a powerful lesson about connection, purpose, and the immense power of vulnerability. Watch until the end to discover the shocking outcome that transformed the lives of everyone involved. The air in the Kahuzi-Biega Equatorial Forest in Congo was thick, humid, and scented with wet earth and decomposing leaves. It wasn't a peaceful paradise. It was a tapestry of sounds, the incessant buzz of insects, the snap of a branch, the distant cry of a bird. It was both home and workplace for Elias, a gorilla caretaker who had dedicated his life to the rehabilitation and protection of these gentle giants. Elias was no novice. He had seen orphaned infants arrive traumatized, seen adult gorillas face illness and loss. But nothing had prepared him for the day he met Kito. Kito, an 8-month-old mountain gorilla baby, had been rescued from poachers. His mother had been killed. He was the very image of loss. Huddled in the corner of his enclosure, he trembled, refusing to eat or make eye contact. Elias tried everything, speaking softly, bringing his favorite foods, even singing gentle songs in his native language. Nothing worked. Kito's fear was an impenetrable wall. One morning, Elias sat outside the enclosure, almost ready to give up. He was exhausted, feeling the weight of responsibility and the frustration of inaction. He closed his eyes and let out a deep sigh. It was at that moment that something unexpected happened. A tiny sound, almost a hiccup, caught his attention. He opened his eyes, and there was Kito, no longer curled up but sitting a few meters from the gate. And for the first time, the little gorilla made eye contact. In Kito's almond-shaped eyes, there was no longer empty terror, but something. Curiosity. Elias held his breath. He didn't move. He simply smiled. A calm smile, demanding nothing. A smile that said, "I see you." And then Kito did something that froze Elias's blood, while simultaneously melting his heart. The baby gorilla hesitated for a second, and then smiled back. A genuine, toothless, radiant smile that lit up the darkness of that morning. It was the signal Elias had been waiting for. The little gorilla stood, turned his back, and began to walk, glancing over his shoulder at Elias, tapping lightly on the ground with his hand, in a gesture that could only be interpreted as, "Follow me." Elias's mind raced. The rehabilitation protocol was strict. No direct physical contact unless absolutely necessary. Logic screamed at him to stay put. But the mental trigger of social proof hit him. Kito himself was validating a new kind of interaction. The baby was begging for a chance. That request was a rare opportunity that could not be ignored. Ignoring internal rules, driven by a powerful intuition and the reciprocity sparked by Kito's smile, Elias opened the gate and followed the gorilla. Kito led Elias through a small stretch of forest within the protected area, stopping in front of a huge bamboo clump. He looked at Elias, gave the same smile, and nudged a branch. Elias understood. There was a nest there, but what was inside and what happened next will surprise you, and it is the key to the conclusion of this story. It was the point at which Elias's life would never be the same. The scene that unfolded changed the way Elias viewed nature, himself, and the fragility of wildlife. What Kito was about to reveal was a secret he had kept and could only share with someone he trusted completely. Elias parted the thick bamboo branches, his heart pounding in his chest. The dampness and scent of earth gave way to a stronger, sweet, almost floral fragrance. There, hidden in a small natural recess, Kito had made a nest of soft leaves. But it wasn't empty. Inside the nest, nestled among the leaves, was a baby pangolin, a rare nocturnal creature covered in scales, resembling a walking artichoke. The little pangolin was tiny, weak, and Elias immediately understood why Kito had brought him here. The pangolin's hind leg was injured, slightly bleeding. Kito, for his part, was gently licking the wound, in a desperate attempt to help it heal. At that moment, Elias understood Kito's urgency and vulnerability. The baby gorilla, who had just lost his own mother and was traumatized, had adopted an even more fragile and defenseless creature. Kito was showing the caretaker not just his own pain, but his heart. He was, in fact, pleading for help, not for himself, but for another. Elias knelt, feeling Kito's authority as an adoptive father and the trust placed in him. He took a small first aid kit from his backpack. "It's okay, little one," Elias whispered to Kito, using the social proof trigger by showing the kit. "I will help, but you have to let me." Kito looked at Elias. The smile had vanished. Now there was a palpable tension and dilemma in the gorilla's eyes. Fully trust this human he barely knew, or protect his new charge at all costs. Elias felt the power of fear of loss hanging in the air. The caretaker acted with precision and calm, disinfecting the pangolin's wound with a gentle solution and applying a healing ointment. He took his time, ensuring every movement was slow and visible, so that Kito could supervise the process. When it was over, the pangolin seemed calmer. Kito let out a small sound, a sort of relieved sigh. He turned to Elias, and in that instant something changed irreversibly. The connection forged was no longer that of caretaker and orphan. It was that of partners on a rescue mission, but the story didn't end with the pangolin's healing. The next morning, Elias returned to Kito's enclosure to check on the baby gorilla, expecting the same bond. What he found, however, was the opposite, a devastating setback. The enclosure was empty. Kito, using the safety bar that Elias had left open the night before, in a moment of carelessness and excitement over rescuing the pangolin, had escaped. The shock hit Elias like a punch. He had broken protocol, trusted his emotions, and now Kito was free in the forest, a young gorilla without the protection of a group, at the mercy of poachers and predators. The trust he had painstakingly earned seemed to have been used by the little gorilla for his own escape. Guilt and panic were overwhelming. The search for Kito would reveal an even deeper and more impactful truth about the reason for his flight. And this is what you need to know to understand the outcome. Elias wasted no time. News of Kito's escape spread like wildfire at the research station. The search team was mobilized, but Elias knew the responsibility was solely his. He was the only one who had broken the rule and established the trust that Kito had used to escape. He scoured the forest, following the faint trail, crushed leaves, a small pile of droppings. Every step was a stab of guilt and uncertainty. The forest was dangerous. Jaguars, snakes, and worst of all, the poachers who had killed Kito's mother. As he walked, Elias began to piece things together, using the mental trigger of consistency. Why would Kito run away? He was eating well, safe, and had just formed a deep bond with Elias through the pangolin's rescue. Kito wasn't a wild animal fleeing captivity. Kito was an orphan, searching for a home and a purpose. He remembered the nest, the little pangolin, and how Kito had begged him to follow. It had been an act of protection. What if the escape wasn't about himself, but about the creature he had adopted? On the third day of fruitless searching, the sun began to set. Elias was exhausted, dehydrated, and on the brink of despair. That's when he saw it, not Kito, but a sign. On the trunk of a wild fig tree, there was a small scratch, and just below in the mud, a tiny footprint. It was the pangolin's. Was the little one alone? Elias followed the trail more closely, and about 100 meters away, the truth revealed itself in a heart-wrenching scene. Kito was there, and he wasn't alone. The baby gorilla was in a small clearing, and around him was a circle of adult gorillas, the feared mountain gorillas, a wild family led by a massive, imposing silverback. Danger was imminent, and Kito, the orphaned and frightened infant, was not fleeing from them. He was communicating with them. Elias hid behind a bush, observing the interaction. Kito gestured, pounding his hands on the ground and pointing to a specific spot. The silverback, known as the Guardian for being fiercely protective of his group, watched Kito with surprising patience. The spot Kito was indicating was the ground, where nestled in a tangle of roots, lay the pangolin. What happened next was the grand conclusion Elias could never have predicted, the reason Kito had fled, and the purest demonstration of the story's mental trigger, the need for belonging and purpose. Kito hadn't run away for freedom, but to secure the survival of his friend. He had guided the pangolin to the gorilla group, seeking the protection of the wild family. The pangolin, without his mother, would have been doomed. Kito, the orphan, couldn't bear to see another infant alone. The guardian looked at Kito, then at the pangolin, and made a deep sound. It wasn't a roar of anger, but a sound of acceptance. He lowered himself, sniffed the pangolin, and then, with a clear gesture, signaled to Kito to join the group. The little one had found his family, and in doing so, had secured a place for his tiny protégé. Elias felt a wave of relief and, at the same time, a sharp pang of separation. Kito had healed. He no longer needed human caretakers. He had fulfilled his purpose, to save the pangolin and, in doing so, save himself. Elias rose slowly, ready to return to the station, when the guardian turned his head and looked at him directly. Elias could no longer touch Kito, but the young gorilla's influence grew exponentially. The Kito effect became the new mantra at the Rehabilitation Center. Elias, now promoted to Director of Reintegration Strategies, used the mental trigger of social proof, Kito's success, to transform the center's approach. Previously, the focus had been on safety and routine. Now Elias advocated a philosophy that was riskier but far more rewarding, healing through purpose. He began intentionally introducing small responsibility challenges for the orphaned gorillas in rehabilitation. The Reciprocity Challenge. The center housed a wide variety of rescued wildlife. Elias began testing the reciprocity of the young gorillas. For example, a baby gorilla, who was apathetic after losing its group, was encouraged, under strict and safe supervision, to care for smaller monkey infants that needed attention. Another adolescent gorilla, showing aggression from frustration, was given the task of hiding food in the simulated forest so others could find it, channeling its energy into a positive purpose. Elias's theory, born from Kito's experience with the pangolin, was that purpose and vulnerability were the keys to overcoming trauma. Instead of being passive victims, they became guardians. This activated the mental triggers of authority and belonging in the young primates, giving them a new social role, the Living Pangolin Project. The success of this approach led to the creation of the Living Pangolin Project, named after Kito's protégé. Elias convinced major international NGOs to fund an elite team focused exclusively on tracking Kito. Not to recapture him, but to monitor the social dynamics of the Guardians group and prove that orphan reintegration was not only possible, but beneficial for the species' genetic diversity. Local education. Elias traveled to nearby villages, using the power of storytelling to tell Kito and the pangolin's story. He didn't speak of science or laws, but of empathy and connection. He leveraged the novelty of a gorilla protecting a pangolin to shock and engage people, turning poachers into informants and protectors. Elias' story became a journey of redemption. He had erred by leaving the gate open, but the trust Kito demonstrated in fleeing gave Elias the mission he needed for the rest of his life. He ceased being just a caretaker and became a conservation philosopher. The challenge was no longer just the physical survival of gorillas, but the emotional connection of humans to them. After returning to the station, Elias was consumed by guilt and even more by the question, was Kito's escape impulsive or a calculated act? Kito was intelligent, but could he be capable of such premeditation? The answer lay in the overlooked details of the crime scene. Elias returned to the enclosure the next morning. He inspected the gate, which had a simple latch. Opening the latch required lifting and pulling simultaneously, something a baby gorilla might do by chance or imitation, but not with intent. Yet, Elias noticed something he hadn't seen in the initial panic: the physical proof. Wedged in the latch was a small splinter of wood, a thin branch, precisely broken, that kept the latch from closing fully. Kito had inserted it to ensure the gate remained partially open. The consistent trail. On the ground near the water trough, Elias found an unusual mark. The trough was partially tilted. Kito had apparently used the water, a valuable resource, to moisten the ground around the fence so that his and the Pangolin's footprints would be more easily detectable by Elias and by no one else in the soft mud. The mental trigger of surprise hit Elias again, but this time with the force of recognition. Kito's escape was not an accidental opportunity. It was a planned rescue operation, using rudimentary tools and tracking tactics. Kito's dual mission. Kito's mind had processed multiple factors. He trusted Elias, which is why he smiled and guided him to the pangolin. Reciprocity. He knew the pangolin needed more than first aid. It needed permanent protection. He needed a group for his own survival, but taking an injured pangolin into the wild alone would be too dangerous. The wood splinter left in the latch was a return signal, an unconscious or intentional assurance that the caretaker, his only friend, could find him. Kito, the orphan, had demonstrated a level of authority and planning rarely credited to such young primates. He had used Elias for the initial healing and then fled, not from Elias, but with Elias' lesson, to protect the vulnerable, the Masters of the Forest project. The discovery of Kito's plan shifted Elias' focus. He founded the Masters of the Forest project, a center that trains young researchers to observe primate intelligence not just in terms of tool use, but in social and emotional planning. This new approach, based on the exclusivity of Kito's story, attracted worldwide attention. Elias now used the mental trigger of proof, Kito's reintegration success and the pangolin's survival, to secure more funding for the Congo. The name Kito, the orphan gorilla, became synonymous with hope and resilience. With each patrol, with each new orphan rescued and rehabilitated using the new methodology, Elias felt Kito's presence. His transformation was complete. He was a man who had been both deceived and honored by a baby gorilla, dedicating his life to proving the profound wisdom of that smile. Elias, in turn, still keeps a secret about his last encounter with Kito, an artifact the gorilla left behind, a farewell gift proving the depth of their bond. Elias continued visiting Kito's escape site, not seeking forgiveness but understanding. He sensed there was more, a final piece of the puzzle of that extraordinary baby gorilla. One quiet afternoon, as he sifted through dry leaves near the fence where Kito had left the wood splinter, Elias felt something rough under his thumb. It was a piece of tree bark, smooth and flat, a kind of natural paper often used by some primates to rub scents or clean themselves. He picked it up. The bark seemed ordinary, but upon closer inspection, using the mental trigger of exclusivity, Elias realized the final surprise. On the rough surface was a small mark, a rudimentary drawing made with the dark sap of a fruit. The drawing was an imperfect circle, and inside it two smaller, slightly irregular shapes. Elias felt a knot in his throat. He knew what it meant. Gorillas don't draw. Gorillas don't leave messages. But Kito had done this, or at least tried. The circle represented family. The two shapes inside, Kito and the pangolin. This was not a plea for help. It was a farewell message and a gesture of gratitude, an act of deep reciprocity transcending species boundaries. Kito was telling Elias, "I followed you, you helped me, and now I will follow my own path with the mission you inspired." The artifact and the authority trigger. Elias never showed this artifact to anyone. He kept it in a safe, using it as his silent authority trigger. In meetings with skeptical scientists or cold donors, he didn't need graphs. He only needed to remember that little drawing on the bark. Kito's bark proved three things that Elias used to transform the conservation world. Emotional capacity. Young gorillas are capable of gratitude and planning a farewell, power of purpose. Kito escaped because he felt a calling greater than the safety of rehabilitation. Enduring bond. The smile that begged Elias to follow him was the beginning of a commitment, not the end. The masters of the forest project flourished. Elias became a living legend, the man taught about life by a baby gorilla. He continued monitoring the forest, knowing that somewhere Kito was thriving and teaching his group the lesson of interspecies empathy. Years later, the original pangolin, now an adult, was sighted by researchers, no longer with the gorilla group, but strong enough to begin its own life. Kito's mission had been successfully completed. The story of Kito and Elias is the perfect portrait of transformation. A baby gorilla taught a man the true strength of vulnerability and purpose. And for those who witnessed the story, the lesson was clear. The greatest value lies not in what you control, but in what you are willing to release.